You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
Sé que solo nos hemos visto 2 veces en nuestra vida. Estoy seguro de que solo tú podrías comprenderlo conmigo. Tú prometiste ayudarme, ¿recuerdas? Si ocurre lo que imagino, nadie te mandará la última película.
L'assassino è ancora qui dentro.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on. Invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss 2 films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise. And at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Next week, we are going greaser mode with one of our favorite boys, Willem Dafoe. So join that sleaze.
That's right. We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover as well. Patreon subscribers also get an honor shout out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for like 7 years. There's like almost, I think, 190 bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series, which we're approaching 60 of, where we talk about new release genre films. And there's a lot of new ones hitting theaters right now you might be interested in. Patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast if you're interested in that. And speaking of which, we had a bunch of people make the jump this week. We're going to give them their shout outs real quick here. We had Hayden sign up. We had Kevin Matthews, we had H, we had Kevin Heaney, we had James M, we had Jameson sign up at the annual tier, got an entire year of the show in advance for a little bit of a monthly discounted rate. We had Tommy Sploosh sign up, we had Jay Merriweather, we had Liam Patrick Monroe, Coriander, Psychosonic 99, Mel D, Aaron Babcock, Andy Rothwell, Jonathan Sampson, Phil K, Murray Mintz, Pepper Yams, Jernfrau, Donkatsu, Ethan Johnson, and Jay Pissman. Thanks so much to all of you folks for signing up. Hope you're enjoying those bonus episodes. We appreciate that support.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody.
That's the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you were listening on either one of those platforms, and I can see the stats, I can see you right now listening on both those platforms, give us a good old rating and review over there. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners. And the last plug, as always, is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for our show, you can get that put on basically anything that you guys can think of. And you freaks thought of a lot of stuff. You have bought notebooks, you have bought hoodies, you have bought pillows, coffee mugs. If you're interested in anything like that, the link is in the description of this episode, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com. But that is it for the intro. Welcome back another week. As always, I'm your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I believe 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks over here on the main feed would have heard from us, where we would have had special returning guest, critic, and author Adam Naiman on to discuss 90s music video directors making atmospheric horror procedural films. We talked about David Fincher's very aggressively unpleasant yet perversely watchable neo-noir serial killer thriller Seven from 1995, celebrating its 30th anniversary. Believe it or not, our very first time talking about David Fincher on the show, and we saved it so we could talk with the guy who literally wrote the book on David Fincher and pick his brains about all the stuff going on in that much over talked about film. But we had to get in on it. We had to take our pound of flesh, and we paired it with Naiman's movie he really wanted to talk about, a movie called The Mothman Prophecies from 2002, directed by Mark Pellington, which was more of this kind of depressed, slow burn, kind of supernatural folklore horror drama, but for whatever reason ended on a crazy Final Destination like bridge collapse set piece. It was pretty wild.
Yep, it did it about 20 years before Final Destination 5, so shout out. Pretty awesome. And truly incredible that the Seven makes me want to go back and keep watching that sloth scene somehow, because it is so disturbing. But yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, so you haven't heard that episode again 2 weeks ago over on the main feed with Adam. Go back and check it out. But then last week over on the Patreon, we took a bit of a left turn and we were like, we are going to talk about the 50th anniversary of some old-timey period action Western films starring Charles Bronson. We talked about Walter Hill's Depression-era bare-knuckle boxing, gambling, hangout drama Hard Times from 1975, and we paired it with Tom Grease and Alistair MacLean's very twisty, pulpy, train set adventure thriller called Breakheart Pass also from 1975, which had Charles Bronson going full Tom Cruise mode and getting in a fight on top of a moving train through like a snowy locale.
Yeah, and after we recorded that episode, I rewatched that scene just to see the little markers that we were talking about, and it is, some of those shots are truly amazing. Like watching Bronson seemingly hanging from a train over a cliff and everything like that. Like whatever they did to get those angles, it's perfect. It's unbelievable. And the simplicity of Hard Times is honestly, I think, the big sell of that. It almost feels like a movie from a completely different decade that it was made. It's very cool.
Yeah. Talking about that movie also made me realize that Charles Bronson had been around so long. He had actually lived through the Great Depression. And it was funny that he made a movie where it was like, yeah, now I'm the 50-year-old man in the Great Depression. It was like, it's like my childhood. Look at this. Look at all this. It was wonderful. So if you haven't heard that episode, again, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. That was last week's bonus episode. But moving on to this week, joining us for the first time is a very wonderful artist and painter who was generous enough to take time from her MFA thesis craziness to talk about some movie nerd shit with us. That guest is Morgan Patten. Morgan, welcome.
Hello. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And I will say, it is a joy to take a small respite away from just planning a show. It's too much sometimes. And I had a really fun time just, watching these movies and getting to talk about them with people. I think it will be really exciting.
We're very excited. Morgan, what two films have you brought with you this week, and why have you paired them together?
Yes, so I would like to discuss or just talk about ARREBATO. So it's also called Rapture. It is a movie directed by Iván Zulueta, if I have that correct. So it's a Spanish sort of horror film. And then I also have the 1978 Closed Circuit, directed by Giuliano Montaldo. That is an Italian sort of like thriller mystery film that was made for TV, so it never got like a release outside of that. But the reason why I picked these two films is they deal with basically the camera turning on you and the metaphysics of film itself in a way I think that's really interesting and plays with the medium in fun ways, in both very different ways, and so we can get into that. But yeah, I think these are really great, and so yeah, I'm really excited to get into them. I'd also like to give a shout out to one of my friends. His name is Benjamin Craze, who also, has introduced, since I moved to New York, was one of the people that helped put me onto these directors previously. And so, that's basically from there. I was like, I was thinking about what movies do I show, and I'm thankful that I've had, ever since moving here, I've been to so many different screenings and seen so many cool movies here, and so I'm really thankful to be in a place where there's so much going on here. And so I thought about these two in particular. I was like, this is so cool. They the way that they deal with just cinema itself turning on you and how powerful images can be. So would love to get into it with you guys.
Yeah, no, it's a really cool like foreign art house like meta horror double feature involving like the dangers of cinema and obsession with cinema. And I literally was like she's gonna go on a film bro like nerd podcast, and she's gonna make these guys like existential about their own obsession. I was like,
I definitely am. I'm turning the podcast on you guys now. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, for God's sakes, one of these movies has the first person that gets murdered is a cinephile and just a total nerd watching more than 2 movies a day. How dare
I can't
you?
wait to talk about it, but that incredible scene where the detectives go to the landlady and she's like, yeah, he watched like 2, sometimes 3 movies a day.
What a
and
fucking
he didn't have any friends, and I guess that happens to you.
That just happens.
We live it every week. That's right.
Yeah.
These guys, this is a movie, movies about guys who would have loved Letterboxd if they had made it.
Oh, totally.
For sure.
Totally.
But they
Ahead of its time.
So.
Yeah.
But we're excited to get into this. So let's jump in. Let's kick things off with ARREBATO.
Pero no se lo dirás a nadie.
Cines.
Sorpresa final.
Y ahora retrocede, por favor.
All right, we are talking ARREBATO, aka Rapture, the 1979 Spanish addiction drama meta horror film written and directed by Iván Zulueta, I believe, and starring. This is going to be bad. I'm so bad with Spanish in particular, but Eusebio Ponchela, as well as the low budget as the low budget Spanish filmmaker Jose Sagardo.
Can I just say that you said? Can I just say that you said Zuleta? I said it so horribly. I was like Zulita. You did a great job.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I get roasted so much for my pronunciations on this show. I have started to put work into it, and this is one of the few where I was like, I was like, I'm gonna try to find an interview with this guy or something. But yes, it is. So it stars the Ponchela as this low budget Spanish filmmaker Jose Sagardo. As a depressed kind of heroin addict with an unhealthy obsession with cinema and a friend who helps him indulge in that. And we'll get into some of the more specific and absurd details of that. But this is our first time talking about the Spanish filmmaker Iván Zulueta, who is a visual artist and an art director turned writer-director who actually got his career started not necessarily started, actually, I guess sort of in the when his heroin addiction became too much and he wasn't able to make experimental short films, he designed posters for some Spanish directing legends like Luis Buñuel and Pedro Almodóvar, and he was a 1960s art student in Madrid who essentially experimented with like 8mm and 16mm film, and in the process of doing so met Almodóvar, who was in sort of the same stage of his career at the time before becoming one of the most successful Spanish filmmakers in the art house scene, basically, of all time. And both were making these kind of underground, no-budget films, and Almodóvar obviously was doing kind of a crude version of what would become his very I will guess art house sensibility of merging kind of like classical artificial Hollywood melodramas of the 50s with like these eccentric comical sort of telenovela and crime film plots with secret affairs and betrayals and surveillance and violent revenge. And both filmmakers had a kind of a sense of the kind of post-Franco countercultural sexual politics and trying to get involved in kind of like the liberation of Madrid and the club scene and the streets and all this kind of stuff. And for Almodóvar in particular, who recently he was a blind spot for me until the TIFF did a full retrospective of his career here recently, and I got to watch like 10 of his movies on film, and it was like such a journey to go through all of his kind of what he described as emotionally sensitive dramas about amorality, where basically he was like, I love making movies about like women and queer characters who are going to make these messy and flawed decisions, and I'm not going to judge them for it, and I'm going to kind of challenge traditional conservative views on some of this stuff. And also just a really, really funny and kind of sensual filmmaker who was like, I'm going to do all this kitschy decor choices. I'm going to, he's the guy who basically discovered Antonio Banderas and Penelope Cruz and Javier Bardem. And, it's a wonderful filmmaker and a wonderful connection for this filmmaker here. And the reason I kind of bring that up is because Zulueta, clearly these two filmmakers inspired each other, and Almodovar is actually in this film doing a voice dub for one of the characters doing one scene, which we'll talk about. It's the Gloria character who first, I think, runs into the creepy camera. This is a very, very strange film. That and both of these filmmakers, I want to say too, united in the fact that they both cast Poncella here as film directors and sort of analogs for themselves, because I realized one of the films that I watched for Almodovar was a film called Law of Desire, which is a drama about him wanting to make a film about his family history with his trans sister, but also a bit of an erotic thriller where he sleeps with young men, and Antonio Banderas is one of them who decides to go Fatal Attraction mode on him. It's a pretty crazy film. But in that film, it was like, this guy is also going to be a filmmaker stand-in for me, which is exactly what kind of Zulueta is doing here as well, giving this filmmaker his own crippling heroin addiction, which is what caused him to take a break from filmmaking and do all of the poster design work for Almodovar, which is what he kind of became more famous for in the sort of art scene, because those posters, if anyone has seen them for Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown or Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, Live Flesh, some of those posters are just absolutely insane. And this film in particular, in researching it, I saw that Zulueta also shot this basically in his own apartment and the apartments of his friends. And apparently many of the drug imagery we see on screen is just him and his friends shooting heroin. So I was like, so that's kind of what we are dealing with here. But it is cool that he was able to do something in such a no budget fashion like that. That's clearly so personal to him, and turn it into this really, really surrealist and kind of scary film on film as a drug addiction, which is, something we technically have seen before in something like Abel Ferrara's The Addiction or something like that. Or
was Martin one of them? Where it's kind of like in an apartment.
Kind of, yeah, the way that it merges vampire and possession imagery as well with that kind of milieu. Yeah, for sure. But Morgan, what was your experience the first time that you watched this? Just out of curiosity.
I find a very personal connection to this film as well, perhaps in a different way. As a painter, I'm dealing with images, but they're still images. The process of making paintings versus film is very different. Film is this sort of moving image. It inherently has a narrative, even if it's just a 5-minute video of a rock or something. There's a narrative there. Paintings, you kind of have to give it that narrative. You can choose to kind of leave it out or whatnot. But there's something, I think, very much, I think that they touch upon really well is the idea of this image not just being an image, but almost a gesture of life, an emotion. When the characters talk about you being raptured by something, and whether it be a doll, right? There's certain scenes where Pedro, I think it's the guy that with the brown hair that is sort of leading our characters to be raptured by this imagery, whether it be the films that he makes, or just something as simple as this doll that he sets in front of the main character's girlfriend. There's basically a feeling there, and it becomes not just an image, but it becomes more than that, and it lives forever in our mind. Or without getting too woo-woo about it, I'm a little bit woo-woo about these things, but it's really powerful. And I think the director here, I think, is clearly, alluding to his own experience with film, with images. But I feel very much the same thing with painting, and film too. There'll be times where I'll watch a movie and there'll be particular images. If it's really something, those images will be in my head for weeks, and they'll come back randomly, like while I'm just like living my day-to-day life. And it's funny because it'll be like just some, movie, we just think, oh, it's just a movie, but no, these things become real, and, they become tangible, even though they're just images. They no longer become that. They become something, something beyond that, which I think is something that he is touching upon in this movie that I think is sort of a universal feeling with things that move us. And I can relate to the sort of obsession, certainly with images. And I think there's certain paintings I look at like obsessively, and I think about obsessively, and the movies that I think about obsessively. So I get
relate.
that. Yeah, we all relate. Yeah, definitely. But
everyone
I
listening
think,
to this probably relates too.
Yeah.
Everyone, yeah, totally. But yeah, I think the way that he deals with it, something that I did like too is like, so Pedro, who is the sort of one of the filmmakers in this movie, who's like sending this guy, sort of whatever. Like I wouldn't even know how to describe it.
It's actually
all of these,
a hard plot to even describe. I was reading other people's even contemporary reviews at the time, and they were like, honestly, if I tried to describe what it is that happens in this movie to you, you probably wouldn't understand or wouldn't believe me. Like, it's kind of one of the, and you don't necessarily know. And
even the way that it's edited has these like, it's like a lot of time lapses, and there's these flashbacks that, and through the style, this is on purpose, but it feels as if there's very little effort to tell you when the transitions are happening. They're either very like hardened, and you're going to be within a flashback for a long time, so you almost kind of drift into it and forget that you're there, and then
I actually lost track of the timeline at a certain point. Yeah. As soon as we hit like the second flashback, when it was like the first time he met Pedro and all of this, and I was like trying to figure out, I was like, okay, so are we back in the present, or are we still in this extended flashback? Or I don't necessarily, I mean, I guess the whole idea is meant to be anything with Pedro in it is a flashback, because the opening is him, mailing this film reel, which you get the sort of the creepy close up of his hands and the materials and the splicing. It's like, it was funny. We just talked about like 2 weeks ago. I was like, it's kind of like what Kevin Spacey's doing in the opening of that. But in here, he's recording this sort of whispery audio tape he intends to mail to Jose alongside a key to his apartment, essentially inviting the this sort of hacky horror filmmaker friend he had, who enjoyed this rapture or this ecstasy of this type of experimental image making that they were partaking in while also shooting up. So maybe it's the heroin too, but there's they associate the two things together a little bit. They blend together in their minds.
Yeah. And I guess them being him being on drugs for, I guess, really the entirety of the film, because it's constantly showing it, is it also creates this pretty obvious unreliable narrator aspect to it, where like all the abstractions kind of seep into reality, so you never really know what you're seeing. Like for at times I almost thought Pedro could have been like a manifestation of his imagination or something, because it's just like, yeah, because there's moments where he's he'll be in a living room, and then they have that one image I love where there's like that doll in the background, and it starts to move and the eyes glow, and I'm starting to think like, oh, we must be going into some like drug induced state or something like that. And then the sound design also in this, I think for me is probably the most impressive thing, just incorporating it with the images and how they edit it all together. Like they do a lot of these things where they kind of like speed up the imagery and have this, I think it's if I'm going to nerd out a little bit, but I think it's like a square sine wave for like, it's a synth, or kind of like a waveform. And it creates this almost rhythmic thing that keeps speeding up. And they do it a couple times in the movie. But it just creates like a real tension and almost like I don't know, I felt claustrophobic, almost like something's closing in on you a little bit. But yeah, there's a lot of just wild abstractions, and it leads to kind of like an unreliable narrator, I find, which can be frustrating, but also it's very intriguing. You want to just keep kind of diving into his brain, but I was getting frustrated here and there, I will admit.
It feels like it has like a descent structure. It
Sure.
moves, and especially we'll get into it in the ending, because also, speaking of another movie that we love that's about obsession with images and obsession with film, it's something like Videodrome. By the time you get to the very end, it's like you have someone who has slowly kind of explored something and picked at a scab at something, and then kind of just like been like, oh, I'm committing to this. I'm going full throttle into it. Because it starts in what you think is kind of a normal place. You're like, oh, this guy's just, he's a bit of a hacky horror director. He's just finished shooting a movie. He's having these sort of frustrating sessions with his editor, but his other stuff is very simple, like lived in, clearly just experienced by this filmmaker, of just like driving around the streets of Madrid and his eyes gravitating towards all the hand drawn movie posters. And I was like, as a guy who literally drew movie posters, I could see why this would affect this guy. And then having a sort of tumultuous relationship with his girlfriend Anna, played by Cecilia Roth, who, by the way, also in Law of Desire, alongside this main actor as well, who he finds passed out, very likely from drugs, in his apartment, which at first he is upset about, because I guess they've recently gone through a breakup and he doesn't want to go through these days-long insular like sex and drug stupors they seem to kind of get into. But it's very funny. He sits down in his apartment for like a minute and he's like, this shit fucking sucks. I'm gonna get high too and go sleep on the couch. There's like shots of him on the couch and he's staring at the TV static. Also, real male living spaces ass apartment with like the gel colored lights and the movie posters everywhere.
The posters too are like there's nothing organized about them, which I kind of enjoyed. That they're almost
everywhere.
Collage the way that they're put together. It's very strange. And just on like a white wall, like you can still see the white patches in the background and stuff. It is very male living space. It's funny.
It's very funny. He's taking a full body bath, in his clothes, he
as one does.
It's very normal boyfriend and girlfriend behavior going on until he spots the package from Pedro, which he begins to sort of watch and listen to, very much in the way that I guess you could imagine like Bill Pullman and Patricia Arquette getting those tapes in Lost Highway. They're just like, we don't exactly know what this is, but there's a vague sort of haunting quality. And regardless, the tape kind of freaks him out, sends him back into his heroin drawer. He gets stoned and they decide that they're going to kind of watch this thing together, and it starts triggering these flashbacks to his memories of indulging with this filmmaker colleague or friend, I guess you could say, Pedro, and it starts in this very ominous place where it's like home movie footage of what looks like an experimentally edited car crash sequence. And you're incorporating a bit of a danger into the imagery, and it takes us into a flashback where he's driving. He's going on a location set for the movie he just finished shooting, this like Wolfman movie, and Pedro's cousin and Jose's then girlfriend Marta is taking him to, I believe, their aunt's rural home, who, while driving, she's warning him about Pedro before they've even met him. They were like, just, this guy's pretty obsessive. He's pretty intense about his experimental movie making, talking about him in a way that like you would kind of talk about like a coddled like man-child or something, where you're just kind of like, don't fuck with his camera. Don't do any of this. He still lives at home, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't eat or fuck is an important context she gives, like literally those words. He is essentially just this eccentric, dorky loner, as she is putting it, and very serious about his art, versus Jose, who is the more sort of like hack commercial filmmaker. He's still charming. He's still kind of a bit of a socialite. He's still someone who has a girlfriend at the very least. And so there's a contrast of types of artists kind of going on in this first meeting between Jose and Pedro.
Yeah, it does feel too like at a certain point, it shows like it has this obvious obsession, especially with Pedro. I mean, the way that is it Will Moore, I believe, his what
a performance by him.
It's insane. He's got these like when he's watching his films and trying to find the little things that he wants to change, or like it's always like 1 second of the film, which I love. Like, it's very specific, and the way that he performs it too is just the most bug-eyed, like like almost drugged out, it seems, when he's intaking like the films that he's watching. And
he's sweating in a pea coat in the summer, like spinning his camera around outside trying to get like nature footage.
And then when he has Jose and Anna watch them with him and stuff, like he's sweating. He gets so like into it and just passionate about it. And I really did enjoy his performance. It's very it's very eccentric and kind of unpredictable a lot of the time. That goes along with his character, obviously. But yeah, the way that he
even
portrays
the way he
obsession.
sits in the corner of a room or something, when that first shot of Jose noticing him in the reflection of the television when they're watching on like they're watching that old movie on like the tube TV, and you can just see the sickly reflection in the screen and the glowing eyed doll underneath the lamp, and the TV starts to speed up like it's on fast forward. And then later that night, Pedro shows up in his room and he's like perched like a gargoyle playing with some sort of like gooey, like malleable clay, and he's just like, "This is what you have to do to like be a good artist."
That's what I do in my studio every day. I have trinkets and I have weird globs of I don't even know what substance it is, but you just find it in the school, you know.
It's kind of like when you see kids nowadays on YouTube and they're watching videos of like slime videos. That's kind of what it feels like he's messing with, while also though talking about like the secret hidden rhythms and pauses of the universe and how film is like a tool for speeding up and slowing down and like finding these forbidden rhythms in the world and
he's
finding our vanishing point. And like
he's going like Francis Ford Coppola mode in Vietnam, just going insane in the jungle kind of shit. Like he's just so obsessive. And what I like too, it's interesting, is they spend so much time talking about it, like the art of filmmaking and the obsession of it, but spend more time talking about it and doing drugs and having sex than actually like working on the craft. And I found that.
Yeah, when he actually watches his film, he's almost embarrassed of it because he's like, it's not actually a very good movie. Like, it's just like, look at this imagery of like stuttered and fractured, just shots of like me outside like my aunt's house. You know, and he's like terrified of even showing it to someone else. And honestly, until he gets that interval timer where he can just really start filming all the time and really get into deliberate constructed rhythms of how to shoot these frames, that's when he kind of starts figuring out that he's going to make something unique that no one else has seen. And it is unique to have the structure of the film be, one filmmaker just watching this film made by his friend, who also recorded all of this very, very creepy, haunted, like whispery voiceover over top of it, where again, he's kind of pretentiously talking about all this stuff still.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What did you...
Something I wanted...
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, something that was really interesting to me, just the way that Pedro, like this obsessive guy, is just talking about film. It's something I actually like just talking with painters. It's very similar, like the way, finding hidden rhythms. Like that's totally...
Artists be like that.
Artists be like that. That'd be real. I was like, yep. And then also, something that he was saying, while he's showing these films that he's clearly like very embarrassed about and he's like hiding and like looking away from, I totally get it. Like I've been there. I made so many paintings. I'm like, what the fuck? I don't know. Like, and there comes a point where I think you start, or at least, for me, I feel like I'm starting to finally get somewhere. But it takes like years to like kind of get to that point. Or I mean, like another, I think also something, and I'm curious your guys' thoughts when Pedro was like sort of voicing over being like, I had no clue what I was doing with the film. I had a belief in the film and the projector and sort of all of these things that I'm using. And he's like saying, I didn't get it right now. I felt like he was saying that both alluding to like, I think towards the end when he's just letting the camera do its own thing and acting independently of him. It's almost as if he surrenders to the camera as a device, and he kind of lets go of that authority a little bit. It takes its own life. I think also he's referring to that, but I also felt like it was almost the director speaking to us as if this film that he's making, it felt like he was kind of channeling. And I could be off, but it felt almost like the director himself was like saying like, this film itself, it deals with the metaphysics of film in a way where, you know, like it changes up, I think, our ideas of, like, you know, conventional sort of narrative film structure. And it's certainly what you guys were saying earlier, like how, you know, narratively could be frustrating to watch. I thought it was, I don't know, I was quite intrigued, and I like sort of the unconventionalness of it and the challenging of that, of narrative structure. I think films
I was constantly like engaged and kind of unnerved by it. It has this very lo-fi, dream-like kind of mood to it, where you do just kind of get what you feel. You're getting beamed thoughts of just like this sweaty, anxious, drug-addicted filmmaker just being like, this thing is just like flowing out of me, and it's a little hypnotic, and it's a little erotic, and it's a little a lot self-destructive, and confusing and crude, and it's all these different things kind of blended into one. And I agree. I did not find it difficult to watch, despite the fact that I would argue it is probably objectively a little difficult to watch.
Yeah, and I do think it has this, like, you're in a way watching kind of like the creative process in some sense. Like, there's like, you're kind of trying to find the satisfaction of something that's finished in your head, and you know, at a certain point, I think you start with an idea, and then eventually you kind of just start following it rather than constantly being in control. And I think that usually is what leads to the best stuff. I don't make visual art, but I make music. And I find that I'll start with an idea, and then you kind of just follow that, and it's what's best suited to what you're creating rather than what you thought maybe you wanted the finished product to be initially, or something like that. And I feel like with this character, he's kind of on that journey, but it's an incredibly tumultuous and abstract and confusing journey, which for me, I had moments of like frustration, which I think is kind of built into the film anyway. So it's not like that is necessarily a slight against the film. But then there were many moments where I found it very intriguing and would find myself getting lost and diving into his kind of abstract mind, and whether or not I was in reality or his kind of like drug-induced dream or something.
I agree with your point about it there being a deliberate aspect to the frustration, just because it's clearly two different types of artists, and it's one artist seducing the other one, right? Like that's kind of the thing, is that you know, Jose has a very different view of what artistic craft is and what making a movie is. He's someone who's like, yeah, I'm actually making a commercial movie that I'm gonna listen to the producers and change the titles of and make it some stupid thing about Return of the Wolfman or something, because that's how artists get to work in this industry. Whereas you have another one who is very committed to his own insular world, where he is experimenting with the form and being like, how do I find these hidden rhythms and use them to transcend into this deeper plane beyond reality through the artistic craft? And how does that process then consume this guy? And it's one of those things where when Jose first meets him, he ends up deciding not to shoot at that location and shoot in Madrid instead. And Pedro, he kind of forgets about him. He's like, that was just some weird, like, hysterical dude I didn't understand, who I had one weird night with. And that's kind of, I think, his view of that guy until he watches his movie. And what's interesting is I think what the actual movie is him watching it and being like, oh, he's winning me over with this. I kind of believe and see his perspective, and I start kind of being sucked in and consumed into the same thoughts and the same feelings that he is through his film. And so you have a filmmaker kind of, I don't know if he's arguing with himself, and there's two sides of him. There's the artist and there's the commercial filmmaker, and it's like one consumes the other, but in order to do that, you're not going to be a successful commercial filmmaker, which is what I find interesting, is because right after that, he succumbed to his artist, just hanging out in his apartment, doing drugs with his friends aspect of his life. And he didn't make film for like 10 years. And this feels like the kind of film leading up to you making a decision like that, where you just go, here's my commercial side being absolutely consumed by my artist side, which you slowly start to see uncover when you get into sort of the second aspect of the flashback, which is when he takes Anna on a drive with him to meet Pedro. and he really does start to collaborate with Pedro. You get that whole element of like, you have that like diorama sort of like theater stage thing. You get Pedro, showing him the pauses in the rapture and getting them to do drugs. You get that whole thing where he like hypnotizes Anna with like putty and like a Betty Boop doll, and they all experience this collective rapture, and they wake up and they watch another one of his experimental sort of like time-lapse films, where again he's going through all of these, opening up like a mirror and a door, and we're getting to the great other and doing all this kind of stuff. And you get so sucked into the memory, you actually forget that you're watching a flashback. And it is one of the coolest decisions I think made in the movie. Speaking to your point about sound design, Jamie, that bit where this memory starts getting interrupted by record scratching. Yeah. And you're like, what the fuck is that? I thought my file was fucked up. I was like, this is wrong. And 100%. then it's literally Anna, the character, the girlfriend in the room, where I was like, oh yeah, they're watching this. He's recalling this because he's watching a movie. Yeah. And literally he's like, stop fucking with the record. Yeah. and that wakes him up into the apartment sequence where it's back to her, and she's like putting on lipstick in front of the TV static, which reminded me of Debbie Harry once again in Videodrome, and her face like blending into the footage of Marta. There's some crazy decisions being made. Yeah.
I love that scene so much. That was like excellent. Kind of, well, he's speaking to you and she's speaking to you at the same time, like Pedro's voiceover. Was excellent. Yeah, I love that scene. It was one of my favorites, I think.
I also love that it's not like just within the sound design, but he's visually cutting it to black for like a second or two to kind of stop the film itself and then bring it back into the edit. It's like he could just, cut away from, cut to the vinyl or whatever they're doing in the actual living room. But instead he actually does cut to a black, to the vinyl, back to the flashback, back to the vinyl. Like it's just a little bit more, I don't know. It's like more static in its editing, or more hardened in its cut. And I think it's very effective. Also, I think too, we were talking about the difference between how they go about their art. There is something really scary too about Pedro, like finding this, I guess, more authentic thing within him that is like this more authentic expression, I guess. But he's had to completely isolate himself in order to do it. And there is something that feels like it's like that kind of honesty comes with a price almost. Like you almost have to completely disassociate yourself from just I don't know, normal life, normal relationships or whatever, to really dive into your own head. And I don't know, there's something scary about watching him.
Although it's sick that his depiction of normal relationships is getting into like, like a heroined out, like fights and makeup sex, and her doing like a little burlesque routine in front of the projector.
Yeah.
And
very strange.
It's like, dude, this is normal. This is normal filmmaker relationship stuff. And this is what you need to leave in the past if you want to be a real artist, man.
Yeah.
It is interesting that you bring that up. I mean, that's kind of also, I think about like one of my favorite painters, Philip Guston, and just like sort of like thinking about the idea and the scariness of like, genius or whatever, or like somebody that's really tapping in to what they're doing in the process and how isolated they become. I mean, that was like, that was Philip Guston, and he was like sort of out in Woodstock painting by himself. He was hated by everyone, and he was kind of crazy. Like, I wouldn't say crazy, but he was like tapped into it. And that's sort of like, that becomes like the lifestyle for, some people, they are more isolated. I found like it was interesting. Like the guy was really weird, but I think he like also, he was like, that's what sort of needed to happen. Like he was so committed that he just like shot himself, on film, like in his bed sleeping all the time, like just, whatever, just to get the glimpse of the red image. And I think I want to talk about that a little bit. The red image.
Yeah, that section is maybe the craziest section of the entire movie. You're talking about like when they get to the, I think it's Jose gets to the part in the film that he's watching that was mailed to him, where he gets into the really final form, I guess, of what his experimental time lapse like montage filmmaking looks like. And we actually do just watch it for a bit ourselves. It's like, the architecture, the public spaces. There's a shot of like the moon and eating and an eye and a light bulb and like coke snorting, and then there's this like silent era like painting, and then there's just shot of just a penis getting hard and a cigarette dragging and a heroin needle, all this like putty like dripping down the TV. And he basically says, I reached this final form, and there came a day where there was nothing new to see. And he entered this deep depression, that there was no surprises, there was no more awe, there was no more ecstasy, and he basically became incredibly depressed and thought about killing himself. That's the point in the film, inside the film, that we are getting to. And then one night while sleeping, he discovers that the interval camera turned on him and filmed him while he was sleeping without knowing. And after developing it and watching it, he sees himself briefly like waking up to some sort of, he can't really figure it out. Is it like, is there a presence in my room, or is this like a ghost film? What's happening? But there's this missing red frame. And he becomes obsessed by these red frames, kickstarting his sense of just like curiosity and rapture again, because he lost it. He was like, I reached the final form of my experimental filmmaking. I need to become obsessed about something else. And similarly to his addiction for, doing that, all of a sudden he's found something that could isolate him anymore, because now he's not even going outside and going and filming things. He's literally like, I'm going to do drugs. I'm going to curl up under my bed and in my coat. And I'm literally and his friends are literally like coming to his door with like croissants, which is, by the way, the scene that Almodovar dubs for him. He plays Gloria, who comes in, and she's the one who messes with his camera while he's sleeping. And it leads him to like freak out and go through like withdrawal symptoms of like, I need to film myself every night and know what these red spots are. And the red spots are getting longer. He's becoming more pale and sickly and essentially just mad. And again, it really does feel like self-destructive pursuit of like some sort of artistic transcendence. But there's something to be said about, at least earlier in the film, where it was like, he's crafting something. He's an experimental filmmaker. In this, it's like, dude, you're just like doing the original Paranormal Activity to yourself, and no one knows what the fuck's happening.
Yeah, there is and there is like a lot of irony too, I think, in the idea like isolate to kind of go down this rabbit hole that he's going down and find, the answer to whatever obsession you're going to. And it starts with making art, which has this like it's I think the irony is it's like you're isolating yourself to create something that is authentic to you and you're expressing it. But then there's also this need, at least for most artists, I would say, to obviously like connect with people through the art. Like you do kind of want people to take it in and whatever, just connect with it in some way, whether that be positive or negative. But he seems like he gets to the point where that's not even a concern with him at all. This is becoming an entirely like singular obsession and just completely an individual expression, which, I mean, the way that it's portrayed in this is very terrifying, but yeah, I don't know. There's some irony in there.
Yeah, I think I think also too, what this character taps into, I think he's certainly not trying to appease anyone, clearly. He's kind of doing his own thing. He's like his own independent actor. But I think also that's kind of the essence of some of my favorite artists, is they're not looking to appease anyone. They don't care. Like he mentions also, when the two main characters are, I think it's Jose, right? Is that his name?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Him and his girlfriend, they're watching that, film of his towards the end, and Pedro is sort of talking over, and he's like, I use these people, I use these actors and extracted kind of what I needed out of them. I mean, he's clearly just kind of using things just to create something, experiment, And I think he touches upon something like, especially as he's moving towards the end and he's becomes obsessed with this red image. It is ironic, but also he's looking to change the form of whatever he's doing. Like, he's like, I've done this, so let's keep it moving. Like, how can we keep like building upon the experiment? How can I keep changing and doing something that I haven't done before? And, not concerned with what others may think. I think that's a key part of like not wanting to appease the audience and just kind of going out there and taking that risk. is something I have much more respect for than the conventional or commercial filmmaker or something like that. And I think that taps into also an acceptance of oneself. Like this guy, yes, he's really fucking weird and he's, bizarre, but he's like, at least, he dives into it. And he dives into it so deeply that, he's so committed to it that he reels in the main character, Jose, and then Jose gets so committed to it that he dies for it, basically. Like we watch, as we see the end, as the camera goes over to him, and something I think is excellent is sort of the shots going, like we can hear like the camera going off and taking those shots, and it, reflects his own heartbeat, Jose's own heartbeat, as he's in the bed and he's like stressed, and you can just feel that energy. It's so funny too. I was like just thinking about it. He's like in bed, he should be relaxing, but yet this is the most intense like situation that I've ever seen someone be in a bed by themselves with, just like he looks like he's about to die, and he does. He dies for this medium. He completely surrenders to it, raptured, whatever. But I think to do that, you kind of have to not care about the audience, and you have to take the risk and leap into it. And it's sort of enveloping. It envelops you in ways. At least that was my read on it.
No, I agree. And I think the way that he seduces someone else into thinking that way is an interesting way of forming your way into that, while also not ignoring the fact that there is this self-destructive, like, I think it's interesting that like the formal lo-fi view of this he takes as something that has the visual vocabulary of like a blood-sucking vampire experience, or someone, or an addiction drama, someone going or descending into some sort of underworld kind of deal. Like movies I was thinking about watching, and I was like, obviously Abel Ferrara's vampire addict movie The Addiction was something I was thinking about, but there's one section that's almost like William Friedkin's Cruising, which is another movie where he kind of takes some of the possession imagery of The Exorcist and puts it into kind of like a street view. But I was thinking of just when he gets like red-eyed and bags under his eyes and he's like relapsing, and he starts doing these things where he's like, there's these grainy shots of him in sunglasses looking like a pale vampire trying to have like a stoned threesome with Gloria, and it ends with her like covered in blood and the other guy's like running away. There's a whole section there that's so bizarre. It's like one of the few times he leaves his apartment and he's like, the outside world is scary, and then he goes into his apartment and he's like, oh, this is nice. Me and cinema are getting up to something in here. There's a line he says too that's like, I always knew that cinema and me were up to something special, and now I've been enraptured and it's possessed me. And he literally is, there's something so comforting about, clearly going through some sort of drug withdrawals in his pea coat, sweating and getting underneath his covers and just being like relaxed by this, despite the fact that the filmmaking does paint this as something that's, kind of scary and something that like one of the most effective, I think, horror images in the film is when he gets to the part in the film where he says that he tried to call Jose because he was like, here's someone who would relate to my experience and relate, he's someone who experienced the ecstasy with me and would understand me. He tried to call him, but he never answered. So instead he recalls his cousin Marta, and you get that insane sequence where he asks her to essentially watch him as he sleeps. And, she turns on his projector in the corner and is kind of curious about the projects he's working on. And you get that long shot of the camera on the tripod in the corner of his bedroom over her shoulder, filming him. And it just slowly pans and turns towards her. And it's like the camera is its own presence. Suddenly, the power of it is like, I'm going to get revenge. And it literally makes her disappear. And it's a really creepy, like ghost horror, sort of possession horror moment in the movie. And it's funny, Pedro essentially describes it or explains it as, the camera was getting revenge because it just saw another woman in the room and it thought it was Gloria who shut it off earlier. And it was like, don't you fucking shut me off. And it's like, now the camera is starting to have a mind of its own. And by the time you get Jose getting to that section, that's when he's like, oh, he actually has transcended or tapped into something, or and this film reels that he sent me is proof of that. And it leads obviously into a finale where Jose essentially does the same thing. He goes to his apartment and he goes through the exact same experience, which is an incredible section of the movie.
Yeah. And ironically enough, just to connect the two films here, we kind of get a very similar ending. Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Film comes alive. There is something supernatural taking place in both of these movies.
Oh, totally.
Homicidal, baby.
Yeah, the camera turns on you. And, and I think why both of them kind of feel like, sort of like there's a horror element to both in ways. Because I think there might, and I know it's like seems insane, like, oh, the camera's gonna kill us, you know what I mean? But I think it just is a testament to like how powerful this shit means to people, like how real it can be. And people will die for it, this is all consuming, and so there's just like that bit of reality, that like the bit of truth there, to how, how like intense this is for people. And it's like, real,
Yeah, I love the sequence when he realizes that, oh, I got the film, I got the audio tape, and I also got the key to the apartment, all for a reason. Because he somehow mailed this to me despite being like transcended into the movie world or dimension or wherever the fuck that it is that he goes. And that's when he gets into his room. He stops the camera. Jose develops the film. He sees almost all red except for one frame of Pedro staring into the camera that moves and smirks and seems to be interacting with Jose. And Jose is sort of positioned in the room watching with the camera behind him the same way it was for Marta. And you get Pedro in this single frame just implying with his head for Jose, why don't you just take my spot in the bed? Why don't you recreate my movie that I just sent to you? And it sort of like his face crossfades into Jose's inside the film. And then the camera also turns and the camera nods to him. It's like, why don't you get into the bed, man? Why don't you go do that? And then Jose's just there. He's sweating. He's pale. He gets into his pea coat. He gets under his blankets. And the clicking just starts up, and the frightening image of just a Canon camera on a tripod just staring at you, and he starts breathing heavily. Maybe the scariest image for me though is when he decides to blindfold himself. And it looks like almost like when you're watching like a hostage tape or something like that, and he begins to go through the shakes and the withdrawals. Yeah, and that was like very, very creepy. And yeah, it's just the gunfire goes off and he, I guess, dies or enters the film world. A crazy like orchestra crescendo hits, and it's a very interesting, poetic and kind of hypnotic conclusion to the film that is very similar to a conversation he has with his editor earlier in the film when he's like trying to describe, he's like, well, you shot all this footage of like her actually being burned and killed and you should use it. And he's just like, no, I'm an artist. I'm going to make, even though I'm making a hack horror movie, I'm going to make an artistic decision, which is that she stares at the audience and they'll get it, that she's delighted to be a vampire. She loves it. No regrets. Story ends there. Full stop. Nothing else matters. And it's very interesting that he ends the film the exact same way, where it's like, but he denies him looking into the camera because he blindfolds himself. Yeah. And it's like, I don't know if he loved this experience or if this was good for him or his life or anything like that.
Yeah, might have not been the best, but
And then the fact that the director made this and then disappeared for 10 years, like you're like, Jesus Christ, man.
Yeah, but now he's a pure, authentic artist, baby. He's never been more honest with himself.
Yes, he's transcended. He's there. He died, but he's transcended now. So what more could we ask for?
Him and Pedro are making experimental films in cinema heaven. That's what's happening.
Yeah, on the other side.
There they
go. How beautiful.
Yeah. But if we're pivoting towards productive rating round on ARREBATO here, this was a very solid 4 for me. I really did like this. I did enjoy the kind of strange and spooky slow burn. They actually say it themselves at one point in the movie, but he's trying to generate a hallucinema, I think is what he calls it. Hallucinema.
Oh yeah. Yes.
And that's what Pedro's trying to do. And I think what's so interesting about the movie is that Zulueta seems to kind of be doing the same thing. Like he has a similar sort of like pretentious lo-fi art house style to him, but he's someone who's trying to capture that. Obviously here is his commercial side of himself and his artistic side at war with one another, or seducing one another, and acknowledging that, like, yeah, maybe the artistic side is winning, but also is the artistic side winning necessarily a good thing for my personal life or for my career or for any of these things? And it does feel like there's a sense of self-destruction and self-loathing baked into this very personal and obsessive experience and relationship with film that this guy has. And to also do that and really abstract it and turn it into like this art house meta horror dreamy kind of thing with these, you know, a genuinely kind of hypnotic and unnerving and kind of erotic style to it. And, you know, one that is at the pure intersection of just like heroin and home movies and these, you know, sort of like extended sex sequences as well. And doing so in a, you know, obviously in a crude and lo-fi, no budget filmmaking style that he could afford to do, but finding so many different ways through just texture and imagery and editing to really get you into this surreal space. And whether it's like the syncopated sort of like editing patterns, which friend of the pod, Adam Naiman, described a little bit as reminding him of like Nicholas Roeg, or Rogue with Don't Look Now or something, that sort of surreal psychedelic quality that they had on sometimes, and also that unreliable unreality that it kind of has to it, and mixing it with this haunting formal vocabulary of like vampire films or possession horror films, and, you know, making the camera, you know, you could say it's as easy as, oh man, like the film is like a drug, man, the camera's like a drug, but he does take, I think, it further than that, and he really does investigate his own addiction to movie making and artistry and all of this, and is like, yeah, it turns me into this like, you know, I'm entranced by it to the point where I become this pale, sickly, bedridden weirdo who's living in like a, you know, a vampire movie, or in this kind of ghostly spectre, you know, sort of photographing, and the camera itself is this unreliable tool, but it's also a kind of a weapon. And I don't know, I was really taken with this on the first watch, so it's gonna get the 4 for me.
Nice.
Would you say you were raptured by it?
I was enraptured. I was ecstatic.
Love a good pun. Welcome to the show. Yeah, I'm right now I think I'm gonna give it a 3. It's a pretty strong 3. I want to rewatch it. I think that I just at a certain point I did find myself getting lost in both negative and positive ways. I really enjoyed the sound design. I thought that every time that he was getting into a more kind of abstract or dreamlike drug-induced sequence, I really think all of that sound design works so well with kind of making it feel uneasy or just unattached to anything really grounded. Again, like that they do this really cool kind of rhythmic thing with I think it's a sine wave, and it just, or a saw, one of the two, but it creates this almost artificial digital sound the way that it does it, and I don't know, it created tension and kind of honestly confusion as it was leading up to the abstract moment. So I just think it's great, and I do really like the editing. Again, the editing kind of leads to that confusion while you're watching it, but I think you're supposed to get lost in this headspace. It's just every once in a while, I guess I got frustrated with it here and there. So I just want to retackle it, I guess, with a mindset of what this film is and what it's doing, because it's far from conventional. And yeah, so the also the narration, I think, was just, I guess, speaking on sound design a little bit, I found that part of it to be grating eventually. I do understand, though, that, you know, having it pop up all the time and kind of giving this constant inner monologue is also really dealing with his, like, the obsession that he's going through. And I think that point definitely is hammered home and works well in that regard. It's just, I don't know, the way it's also designed is it has kind of like a lo-fi filter on it, where it's almost like a telephone EQ or something like that, and it just, I don't know, it just grated on me a little bit. I found it to be a little bit annoying, just from like almost physically, like just taking it in and listening to it. So that kind of got to me. But again, I think that's kind of a minor gripe that I'll hopefully get over when I watch it the second time. All the abstractions I think were great. And yeah, and I do think that it was interesting to kind of watch two characters that have opposite perspectives on art, and at least at first it seemed like the polar opposite. I make a bunch of different genres with music, but one thing I love making is metalcore, and it literally is a genre where you're applying pop and metal together, which is, you know, kind of the opposite spectrum there. And so you're fighting a mainstream mentality with an underground mentality. And I've always found that really interesting. But because of that, you are kind of constantly fighting yourself, because you want to rebel, and you want to be like, you know, kind of heavier than maybe someone would want to take in. You know, they're going to start calling it emo screamo or whatever that kind of stupid stuff is. But then you also want to create, like, I'm obsessed with creating earworm melodies, but that is directly associated with pop music, which would go with something that feels to a lot of people less authentic and, you know, less honest. So I don't know. I just found that part of the film to be really intriguing for me, of like kind of battling that thing within you that's like, who am I satisfying, myself or an audience or both, or, you know. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting. So yeah. For now, 3, but I think I want to retackle this one.
Sweet. For you, Morgan.
All right, I'm gonna do a 4. I think something about this film, I loved the abstractions. I think something about abstraction, it feels like a new sort of language to deal with things. You know what I mean? Like it's exciting for me. I like it when also, you know, and what you guys say, the narrative structure, although can be grating, challenging sometimes, right? Because it's not adhering to the conventional standards. So sometimes it is hard to follow. Like the one scene where, you know, again, Pedro's out, like he's like, you know, alludes to them like having a threesome or like going out, and he's like, you know, that part, to be frank, I had no idea what was happening around that part. I was like, I don't know, like, why is he going out? Like, what?
They also do this really weird, like, quick cut where they go up around the corner where they're assumingly going to have sex, and then it takes no more than, I think, 1 or 2 seconds before the guy comes back down the stairs completely naked and covered in blood and running down, and you're like, that happened fast. Holy shit. So
that happened fast. Yeah. But they play with that, and, you know, sometimes I'm like, you know, that didn't make sense, but I think when I watch films, you know, and I am very intentionally like to pick things that, you know, kind of challenge that, you know, conventional structures. I think it's fun. I kind of surrendered myself to that a bit. I didn't fight against it, even though there's like a couple parts where I was like, I really don't know like why they're here. But then I just let it happen. And then I kind of, once I reflect back, I'm like, I get it a little bit, you know, I get sort of the decision making there a bit, even at the time, especially at the beginning, as I was trying to understand, you know, what was happening. Sometimes I just surrendering yourself to that, I think is sort of the way I, sometimes when I watch films like this, where I might be like confused, right? I kind of just let myself experience that sort of confusion, which can also be somewhat turn sort of satisfying because I'm curious. I think that it piques my curiosity as to the, you know, the decision making there. I do think, and also touching upon Jamie, what you said about like sort of, you know, making music. I think then like sort of the pop metal thing. You know, I love pop music, you know, even though, you know, it's popular for a good reason, you know. Yeah. I think what a lot of great work, and, you know, regardless of, I think, the medium, is like it taps into something, I think, perhaps that's universally felt, but also challenges us, I think. So I think there's a mixture of both, you know. I think that can be had there. You know, this movie confronts us. It may not, you know, it may confuse us at times, but I like when seeing an artist or whoever take the leap, you know, just the risk of trying to attempt something like this. And I think in the ways that it does do, you know, with the sound design, the editing, and just allowing, you know, us to sort of be, again, I'm going to say it, enraptured. I think it's quite, I think it succeeds in ways. I think it does. And I I felt a few things through a couple scenes in this, and what more can we ask for? I think to feel something. Whenever we're consuming, like watching a film or listening to music or looking at whatever imagery, to feel something that's excellent, and to feel moved by it. So I would give this a 4. I was thrilled.
Awesome. Hell yeah. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for ARREBATO or Rapture. And we're going to be right back, and we are going to be talking about the film once again coming alive and threatening us in a film called Closed Circuit. Stick around.
Questa è una sfida per Dio e io l'accetto.
Si può dire che tra loro in comune avevano una sola cosa: la sedia dove sono morti.
Sembrerebbe la sfida di un pazzo.
All right, we are back, and we are talking Closed Circuit, the 1978 Italian murder mystery and also quasi sort of meta horror film and TV movie written and directed by Giuliano Montaldo, co-written by Nicola Bertolucci and Mario Gallo, and starring Flavio Bucci, Aurora Clement, and Tony Kendall as various audience members of a matinee screening of a 70s spaghetti western film that results in one of the theater patrons being shot and killed in such a way that it appears like the on-screen shootout was motivated by it or was cover for it. And presuming that someone in the theater did it, they lock the doors and basically try to investigate which of them did it. Kind of Agatha Christie or sort of Sherlock Holmes style. This is our first time talking about the Italian writer-director Giuliano Montaldo, a man whose career started out in the world of Italian Communist Party theater troupes and assistant and second unit directing for some pretty accomplished Italian legends like Elio Petri, who did Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion, and Gio Pontecorvo, whose Battle of Algiers has been covered on this show, arguably one of the greatest, most clear-eyed and unglamorous pieces of like armed revolutionary political instruction conviction cinema that's basically ever been crafted. And from what I understand, Giuliano was a direct second unit director on that film, so he literally did work on Battle of Algiers. Early in Montaldo's directorial career in the 60s, he made these kind of politically conscious crime films, but his biggest claims to fame are one of the John Cassavetes and his wife Gina Rowlands slumming it in pulpy genre pictures to afford to make their awesome movies they made together in the US, which was a gangster movie called Machine Gun McCain from 1969, which I've had on my watch list forever and still haven't watched it yet. This might motivate me to do that finally. But also his biggest one is this sort of biographical drama, Sacco and Vanzetti from 1971, which was about the Italian immigrant anarchists who were unjustly tried and executed in the 1920s due to kind of anti-immigrant and anti-communist prejudice in Boston at the time. He also apparently made a movie about the invasion of Ethiopia in the 1930s starring Nick Cage in 1989.
Watch listed.
Which, yeah. No idea. This guy had a very, very strange career from what I could tell. And this was co-written, it's worth noting, by Nicola Bertolucci, who was the Oscar-nominated Italian writer who collaborated with Luchino Visconti on many of his sort of decadent and opulent historical dramas, including The Damned and Death in Venice. So these are two guys who worked alongside and with some Italian legends, but never quite broke that barrier themselves. And here is a very strange merging of single location murder mystery, Italian TV like police procedural, and supernatural meta horror, setting up this premise that, as I've obviously already laid out, kind of has this exterminating angel, but also, Jamie, you might remember this Anguish, the other sort of like theater set horror film, meta horror film that we've talked about, where it's like there's like a De Palma-esque like giallo within a giallo like happening, and there's a serial killer like in the theater. But
wasn't there also was it called Demons? or something like that, where it's like they were watching
there's the other Italian one.
Yeah.
We did that as one of our patron virtual watches, which is like, a whole bunch of, it's like if Italian horror sort of like zombie movie started happening inside of a movie theater.
Yeah, I gotta say, I wanna just go down a huge list of movie theater setting film because I love it. Honestly.
Recommend us some more. There's movies we've talked about that have great sequences, like Messiah of Evil has that fantastic movie theater horror set piece. Scream 2 is one that we've talked about as something that was almost directly referencing anguish.
A simple one, but Cape Fear. Love that one. Cape
Fear, of course. But yeah, I would say this and Anguish are the closest to films, and Demons, I think so too.
Sure,
ones where the whole movie is set within the theater, and it almost becomes this siege movie where the theater is both the thing that you are sort of hiding in for safety, but it's also this claustrophobic setting where the movie is playing on the artificiality and the construction and the tense participation of the audience and the spectator, and how they are kind of being made to be fearful of their hobby and its ability to bend reality. And to, and again, mixed with, the sort of exterminating angel, everyone trapped in a space by these like surreal supernatural forces. Although I guess you could say here, there's not really a supernatural force keeping them in. It's just the cops. It is, which is maybe the thing I thought was the funniest about it, which is like all these people are just coming in to enjoy a spaghetti Western. Someone ends up dead. All the cops just go, okay, we are going to, like Sherlock Holmes style, interrogate every single one of you looking for the lone gunman or assassin kind of among you. And as the sort of movie goes on, it makes this kind of really great sort of comical use of how these characters think that they're in this very dry and literal cop procedural, and they're just like trying to interview all of these people, and they can't comprehend that there's maybe a more sociological and technological complex situation that is taking place. But the movie builds all of these incredible suspenseful sequences around kind of hinting to us that there is something creepier happening here right from the opening image, which is a gun pointed down the camera, like the final shot of Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. But suddenly it zooms out and it's a little kid pointing a toy gun at like a spaghetti Western poster of the cowboy pointing the gun at the poster. And you're just kind of like, this is a movie directly about, the movie threatening you, pointing a gun at you. And you get that right away, but also the artificiality of it, because when we first see the patrons waiting outside the theater for this matinee screening, you get cuts to like that King Kong like promo truck where they're just showing you how ridiculous it is, like everyone go and check it out, and also the sort of rhythms of how this place works, of how the people are excited to be let in and the employees are kind of frustrated inside, sort of preparing and getting the concessions ready and herding everyone in kind of deal. And also the strangeness of the world is being I guess you could say honed in on. One of the things that one of the employees is listening to is a radio report about a man being abducted by a UFO, and everyone just kind of go,
it's very,
it happens.
That's
shit
the
like
thing.
That.
The stuff that they're listening to and watching on the news is actually really either strange or violent or whatever it is, and they're just kind of,
it's like science fiction or like political reporting.
And they're just kind of passively listening to it or watching it. Just it's like another day to day, no big deal, going to the movies. And I also love the way the camera moves in this movie in general is pretty incredible. I mean, it's constantly doing these super smooth pans, and particularly when they're introducing all of the different characters when they're going into the movie theater, it's fantastic. He even does certain blocking and camera movements that he repeats later on for a very specific reason, because they eventually do a reenactment of what occurred when the first murder happens, and he does again when they set it up the same camera movements, but instead like performances will be slightly different because obviously it's in a new context now. But I just thought it was brilliantly made that way, and his shots in general are so good, especially for this. I know it doesn't matter if it's like a TV produced movie or not, but it really does matter about the director. But very few times do you see a TV movie look this elegant, honestly. Like it's so smooth the way the camera moves around and focuses on certain things. Like there's a part where one of the guys is really wants to get inside, but it's still locked, and it kind of follows him over his shoulder, and then the camera pans more into the theater where you can see the clock, and it's just there's just these little details throughout every shot that I thought was pretty incredible.
Yeah, you could see someone making this in the more dry and literal way of just being like, this is going to be standard coverage of like cops doing an investigation and going Columbo mode.
Right.
But you can tell he has put a lot of effort into thinking, how do I get the camera to motivate and make you feel tense and uneasy? But even while you're watching things as simple as like the ushers just like leading people to their seats and people watching like 70s film print ads for like alcohol and clocks and digestion meds and like all this, like just getting into the rhythms and tropes of images of even the spaghetti Western itself, because he's mirroring the setup of all these people sitting down for a movie with like those shots that you would obviously expect in like a Sergio Leone of you know, the close-ups of the eyes and the cowboy, you know, getting closer to his gunfight, getting into this, you know, stare down near the dry desert railway. And obviously my movie nerd brain immediately was like, what film is this? What are they watching? What are they doing? Oh yeah. You know, because I thought I saw Giuliano Gem, who is on the poster with for Day of Anger with Lee Van Cleef, and that's in the lobby. But then when they go up and they say, oh, that's not playing, that starts playing tomorrow. And then I was like, oh, maybe it's like one of the Pistol Faringo films or something. Either way, I hunted it down, and it turns out it's a movie called A Sky Full of Stars for a Roof. So I was like, I have no idea if that's a, you know, it is a sick name. I might have to check it out.
And didn't they also, because it's, you know, the whole film, at least in the central plotting here, is based around the shootout sequence that ends up in the murder or whatever. And they reshot like using the actual star of that film to kind of recreate.
I think they did. Yeah.
Which is just
that's
so
what
cool.
That's what I was like also wondering about. I was like, they had to have gotten the actors to reshoot that again and be like, yo, we need you to shoot this again, but we want you to point the gun at, you know, the viewer. And how fun is that? I love that.
It's really cool. And awesome. As someone that I didn't know, you know, I didn't know what the film was until I looked it up. And so I thought maybe, you know, this was just like a meta film where it's just a film within a film. And it also, although it did look too good, to be honest, I was like, if this is a film within a film, this is a good looking spaghetti Western.
I was like, it's a pretty good parody. If it looks like the real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but regardless, it was just so intriguing. And then when my brain was thinking like, oh, this has to be real because of how it looks, and then that ending happens, which we'll get to all those details. But when that does happen, I just started spinning. I was like, this looks too authentic, and this is interacting with the film that we're watching right now. So it was a very cool effect for them to kind of reshoot it and calibrate it in a way that it makes it look like it's from that exact film. And yeah, I thought it was amazing. Also, there is we were briefly talking about that gun freeze frame at the beginning, and I just think it really focuses well on the tonal changes that this movie is going to do, because it has that freeze frame for like a good 2 minutes while it's doing credits, and it's just the barrel of a gun. So, you know, all your brain starts to go into like crime mode or action or, you know, thriller or something like that. And, you know, that has this movie has all of that, but it's just a matter of when it turns into the kid pointing the gun back at it, it kind of has more of a tongue-in-cheek aspect to it, which this film also dives into. I found it really intriguing that it's quirky, but still kind of has that tension built into it. And it's kind of balancing a lot of different things.
Well, it's doing that classic murder mystery thing you have to do, which is that, like, as the movie is, you know, it plays out, it's focusing on a couple of key patrons in like the cast and making sure that they have distinguishable personalities. And like, you get the bespectacled sort of sociology nerd, played by, I believe that's the one being played by Flavio Bucci, who's Daniel, the blind dude who gets owned by his dog in Suspiria, and who is just like me during film festival time, where he shows up in the movie with his pad and paper for notes. You get the bald cheapskate who can't take his cigarette in and, you know, shows the cinema pass. He's clearly the cinephile who goes regularly and will eventually become the victim. You get a man in a white suit who has this mysterious conversation with a woman about how scared she is and everything's going to be fine. And at first they seem kind of the most overtly suspicious of being there for some sort of dangerous reason we don't know. You get the strange, like, shaggy-haired man in a trench coat who runs in with only like 10 minutes left and sneaks in behind the screen silhouetted by it, which is a fantastic image. You get the young couple making out, of course, because that's a trope you need in there. You get the sweaty older man who sits down right beside them, interrupting them, and in front of another guy who he annoys and blocks his view. You get the woman and her elderly mother, who's the one who's shouting at the cowboy for being an idiot and like not shooting sooner. And you're just picking up all of these various personnel who would be at a screening like this before getting to the climactic gunfight where the cowboy goes, I've been waiting years for this moment, and slowly, intensely, like, marches towards the other one, shoots him dead. And at the same time as that, the older, sweaty man who sat next to the young couple is hit by a bullet, and the teenage girl sitting right next to him screams, and hysterical chaos breaks out. They yell for the projectionists to stop the film, and we are like, there has been a murder in the movie theater, in such a sacred temple as this.
The most sacred.
It shouldn't happen,
I think.
Yes. Something that was so fun, like, also it's like, and I think you guys already mentioned, like, it's got this sort of like whodunit, like, let's close up the shop, like, let's all get in here and figure it out. So it's like sort of comical. It's comical in ways, but also still manage to have that sort of seriousness and like tense, sort of like tenseness amongst the people there. Something I thought was funny though is like the cops are all like, people keep getting shot, and they're like, yeah, let's just keep redoing it. Like, that's
one of the funniest decisions made in the entire movie. Let's just keep reenacting and restaging this event over and over again and see if we can identify. I don't even know why they think it's going to work the first time, because they just expect the killer to just do it again.
Yeah.
Why would the killer do it again?
Do it again.
He's like, he just has this homicidal urge when that scene pops up and he can't help himself. That theory is absolutely hilarious. I also thought it was obviously darkly funny, but just because what happens is the first time the guy gets shot in the middle of the the movie, and then the teenage girl beside him has this big close up of her and she screams, and then everyone else panics and everything happens. And then when the second murder happens and he dies, they do the same thing where they go back to the girl, but she's in even more of a panic state. Like, she can't believe it's happened beside her twice in a row. And there was just something
they just
so
re-traumatized her trying to figure this shit out.
Yeah, it was that. I think that's what it was. It was like the incompetence of the police to do this and then get them in that same position again. Honestly, just made me howl with laughter. I was like, that is so stupid and funny in a good way. I thought that it's kind of like you said, Josh, it's like, what is the real move here? It kind of feels like he's just grasping at straws, because at this point he kind of is like he has. Well,
they do have people. Nothing. They do realize it's almost like a Twilight Zone thing, where they do realize they're in some sort of bizarre situation. Like when the police get called in and they take their crime scene photos and they lock the doors and all of this, they proceed to try to get to the bottom of it, but they can't find a murder weapon, and then they just start questioning people and trying to figure out what's going on. They question the shaggy-haired guy who snuck in without a ticket. A sensible choice of first interrogation. It turns out he's a playwright who was sneaking around to find his script that he had left there. And then they interviewed the sociology dork who was taking notes, and he was like, yeah, I was taking notes on the audience rather than the film. And I had no interest in the movie or anything, so I wasn't paying that much attention. Then they go to the lobby worker, who turns out to be like a nuclear physics student who was studying in a closet. And then the poor guy who really had the runs and spent most of the movie in the toilet. And then the guy who changed seats because he couldn't see, and they were like, or did he know something? Was he trying to get out of the way? And that's the guy who makes like a joke confession about how he did it and must have like swallowed the gun and hit it. And there's like, you're just pissing us off. Mm-hmm. And then they get to the ticket taker, who like really wants to be let out to go on a date, but needs to answer questions about any suspicious people he saw come in, and eventually interviewing the mysterious couple, clearly there with some sort of ulterior motives, who were overheard by one of the employees having like a secret chat about being screwed and knowing it would end this way and all this. And they have literally no shreds of evidence of any kind, and people are obviously getting impatient about the lack of food, and they can't smoke in the theater, which is a huge 1970s problem to have.
And on the outside, like the press is going wild, and people are starting to kind of gather, and
the reporters are building, and some people simply looking for their friends and family, like inside. And it is where you get the one section, which is maybe the best scene in the entire movie for me personally, which was the detectives briefly leaving the theater to talk to the landlady of the victim, who confirms that he was a kindly gentleman cinephile who watched 2 films every day, sometimes even 3. Isn't that so strange? And he was a former civil servant who paid his rent on time and had no friends or enemies who would wish him any kind of harm. So there's just like, this doesn't, it doesn't add up to be any kind of victim. But one of the funniest things she says is, you could ask him about any filmmaker and he'd like tell you their life story. He was obsessed with movies and, described them as a way of communicating visually with pictures and symbols like cavemen before words. And they even come across some of his writing where he's like, today's best films, rather than mirroring the world, seem to want to infiltrate it. They go looking for, its most essential and innermost aspects and go beyond reality and imagination and distort reality. And, you get that great moment where the landlady stares in the reflection of the mirror and she's like silhouetted or shadowed by it. And she's like, he would sometimes look in this mirror and just go, this is my image. And I was like, it's so true. All cinephiles do this. This is how we wake up every day.
Before every episode.
I love how the director was like, he's like, this guy's gotta go. Yeah, we gotta get the cinephile first. We gotta kill him. Let's just do it. And then, and it's also funny too, just like going on, like, it's like, and it also, like, as we were talking about earlier with the cops, like, the people keep dying and they're like, we don't care. Like, let's just let's just find the guy. Like, let's just shut these people in. They can't smoke or anything. They can't do anything fun. And we're gonna just keep killing them, basically. Like,
that's what makes them decide. We're like, we're gonna do the reenactment. Like, that's what they're like. We have nothing else we can do. So I don't know. Run the film and see if the killer strikes again and maybe he murders somebody else.
I think their plan is to kill enough of the victims that it just narrows down to the killer. It's pretty genius. Honestly.
That's pretty effective, honestly.
Yeah.
But first, the cinephile first. Yeah, we got to get him first, and then everything will come clean from there.
One of my favorite lines when they are in the apartment and talking about the cinephile is when she goes like, and with a shocked expression, it's just like, if he liked it, sometimes he'd even watch the movie twice. Like, just crazy, wild. She would her head would explode if she saw my Letterboxd logs. Oh my god, she made me feel like
you've
loser.
Seen Heat how many times?
Yeah, exactly.
Man, what?
You've watched this 3-hour movie how many times? Oh man, but yeah, I loved that entire scene, and it does, like, any time that he's talking to any character, honestly, there is like a lot of really fun, eccentric characters, or even. Like, the one that I guess is the most conventional is probably the couple that's having an affair. I do like their introduction because it does, just the way that they talk to each other at first actually does seem like maybe even almost even something violent could be transpiring, but it's just
it seems like they're in like a paranoid, like, conspiracy thriller movie or something, and you're like, sure, clearly they have something going on. And when they eventually reveal that their suspicious secrecy is just the fact that they are 2 married people having an affair with one another at the movie, and they they are afraid to be caught rendezvousing together, and it will blow up their relationships and all of that. And it's the moment where the cops realize, wow, everyone here has something to hide, but it's not 2 dead bodies on their conscience. Like, no one here is a killer. They're all just being weird and cagey because people are kind of like that. And that's where it's funny that one of the main characters, like a sociologist character, like, it's so important that he's the guy who sees what's happening here and understands the people better than the cops do, who are just like, I don't know, keep restaging the movie and wait to see if somebody else dies, which is like, maybe one of the other stronger sequences in the movie is the first time that they do restage it, and nobody knows it's going to happen a second time yet. But people are just kind of freaked out because they're just asked to relive this recent traumatic event they've just went through. Yeah. And the filmmaking, I just love the imagery of all the people sitting in their seats and they're dwarfed or framed in profile or in split diopter with like their relation to the screen. And everyone is so stressed out and waiting for the climax and looking around being like, is the shooter going to come up? And there's some characters who have like moved their seats and people are like suspicious of that, of being like, that's not where you were. And also some people probably just didn't fucking remember exact seat that they were in, or the exact behavior that they did.
Because it is a pretty empty theater when they go out. It's like, you know, only a quarter, if that, full. So there is a lot of like important information just when it comes to people's placing, when it comes to like figuring out who this murderer is. But I also like the comedic aspects of just human nature when you're in the movies. Like there's a couple moments where like the one guy that ends up moving seats, it's because I think it's the cinephile that does it, but he sits directly in front of him and he's just like, really, dude, out of all these fucking seats you had to sit right in front of me? And then he moves. And then there's another one where I think like someone sits beside somebody when, again, you have so many other seats beside you. And I just, those little like psychological things we all think about when we're at the movies, I thought we want
to make an official Sleazoid statement that those are the worst people on the planet, by the way.
What do you do?
If there's just two people, especially now that where we book our seats ahead of time, and it's like there's two people and you're like, I'm gonna get the seat right beside those two people.
Yeah, it's like taking the urinal beside you when there's 8 others, you know. It's just we don't do
this guy deserves to be taken, you know. The cinephile character perhaps got what was coming to him when he chose that seat, is all I'm gonna say.
True. Yeah. For a cinephile guy that goes to the theater all the time, not the best.
He should know
etiquette.
better.
Yeah, but he did need some better etiquette. Maybe that's what the cowboy was mad about.
Yeah, they were like, we got to get this guy gone. He doesn't understand. Yeah.
I do love that the ticket taker is the one who volunteers to sit in the seat of the victim in an effort to both speed up the process, but also to appear as a hero. He's the one trying to get out to go on a date with his girlfriend. He's tell all the reporters outside that like I volunteered to be in the guy's seat. And then when it replays out and the ticket taker gets shot because the gunshot rings out during the climax again, and everyone just screams and panics again. And his girlfriend is forced to endure the paparazzi watching like his corpse get taken out and stuff. And the cops are just like, whoops, everyone's even more scared and livid. And we didn't solve anything. Is this a cursed seat or chair is basically as far as we've gotten.
Oh man. One of my favorite shots, just the movie, like I said, I guess I was talking about how the camera moves around the theater itself. But I have to say there's some really beautiful shots. One that I really loved was when they go, and I guess they use it a couple times, is when they go into to behind the stage or behind the screen.
Oh, yeah.
And you see people just kind of like walking back and forth, but it's set up where you can see the screen, and it's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like sectioned off through the beams that are in the forefront of the shot. And so you can kind of see like faces that look like they're in frames within a frame, if that makes sense. And there's also kind of like a silhouetted effect. And for some reason too, there's these hanging, it seems like pots or something that just, I don't know what it is for a theater, if it's just aesthetic, but it looks really great in the shot. So I just particularly love that.
I love that part too. I was just about to bring that up. Like, you know, when we go back and we follow some of the characters are kind of going back behind the stage, and yet like the films are still moving and the characters are kind of peering at us. Like they're sort of glancing, like we see some hint of the cowboys sort of glancing at us, like behind, like they're aware of ourselves behind, you know, the screen. And they're like looking at us, still. I love that, and the framing of it, the way that they just had everything set up, like the staging and everything. It was like excellent. I thought that played into the whole theme pretty well. Something, and I don't know if it's like too soon to talk about this, like the sociologist, as we get,
that character's great.
That character's great. He's excellent. You gotta have to have that one guy that's just like, I'm just here to study people, you know.
Well, yeah, and he's the one who comes up with the theory when the cops are like completely like they have no idea. They've just killed another person trying to restage it and are still no closer. And he's the one who goes, you know, maybe the first victim acted as like a vessel in a seance, and they have unleashed some sort of, curse that will recreate the same gunshot in the same spot. And, they have trouble finding like the hole in the screen, and then someone goes up on a ladder and finds it, but they can't figure out if it's like a bullet hole or if it's just like damage to the screen. And, they're trying to figure out all this stuff. And the sociologist is like the only one who's, being at least analyzing what it is that's actually happening and going, you're not going to get any information out of those two guys who are clearly just there, selling drugs. Like, right. I get it. They're being suspicious. They're being weird. But like very clearly those guys are just drug dealers who are stuck in your movie theater because you won't let them out. So, he's the most discerning and curious and like good at reading clues character in the film, who then kind of forms a bit of a bond with the one detective who disagrees with the sort of bullheaded direction of the Italian police, as spearheaded eventually by that head commissioner who comes in and takes over the case and is the guy who's like, we've analyzed the bullets and they're foreign. And that cinephile victim worked for the Ministry of Defense. So what this is a political assassination by an enemy state. And you get that cop just being like, look, I'd also like the killer to be like an extremist group from like outer space or something. But the only passion that man had was for the movies. Yeah. So you're barking up the wrong tree here, sir.
I love that. This stuff is really when they start diving into a little bit more of the comedic aspects that come with this ridiculous situation. Like one of my favorites, even though he ends up being right, is when they undermine the sociologist, where they've already called him like a harmless nut and he's had his theory about the seance and everything like that. And then later on, they're behind the stage and they're talking again. And he's like, hey, come over here. I want to show you something and give you this theory on something. And this music kind of starts, and he's like, just follow me. It's going to be intriguing. And you think you're going to get into this long explanation of some like maybe kind of batshit, but something intriguing, some type of theory of what's going on. And instead, the inspector just eventually goes, wait, no, fuck this. I think you're insane. And the music cuts and he just walks away. And it's such a funny beat. I was like, I couldn't believe how funny that was and how leaning into, like, it's literally just a comedic beat. And again, you'd think that'd be out of nowhere, because I think it is the funniest moment, but I think it balances all of this suspense and tension and mystery and comedy, because the comedy kind of is grounded within just these unique characters that we're all meeting. And, if we were to get into a movie theater and have to talk to all 50 people there, I'm sure there would be some characters. So I like that they kind of dive into that.
Well, it's always been part of the pleasure of the whodunit, and especially the TV like procedural and stuff like that, is, you want to give the characters a little bit of personality, and that's why I think it's so cool that how much he does deliver on the Italian TV police procedural with a little bit of like a wink to it. Mm-hmm. Like he's having fun doing the dry version of this event, but having all of the characters slowly, I mean, I guess not all of them do, but like keying us into the fact that there is something more suspenseful and supernatural and something happening here, because it's just, you do feel like part of it is you're watching like an episode of Italian Columbo or something, and then all of a sudden it's just like the camera does this crazy move or does this really claustrophobic, really striking image that calls attention to the artificiality of this and the reality bending, infiltrating power between image and spectator, and obviously building to this fantastic supernatural climax that we're going to talk about. But it's really only the directing and the camera work that's letting you in on that. Mm-hmm. The rest of it is written and structured, and the characters are clearly believe themselves to be just in like a TV murder mystery. And it's like, sometimes those are driven by character personality and humor, and just, especially when you do something as specific as trapping them all into like a single location style thriller where they're, humorously making demands to the commissioner to be like, you must provide us with TVs and smokes and electric shavers and everything we're going to need to like be in the theater comfortably until this mystery is solved. And there's that great shot of an incredibly meta shot of all of them in the theater chairs, not looking at the screen because the screen screen is fucking killing people. Yeah. They're instead watching all these little TVs of things happening outside, and they're all wanting to watch different things. Some people want to watch the news about like the feminist protests. Some people want to watch the game shows, and you know, they're all just sitting in there being like, wow, you know, being single file lines to get to the bathroom and all that kind of stuff. And it's it's very humorous in that way, I think.
Yeah. I also love there's an image where, like, we were talking about kind of some of the moments of the incompetence of the police, and I still like that they present them in this confident way. Like, the inspector still, he's very you know, standing upright, thinks he's going to get the job done. Like, he presents himself as competent, even though things just keep getting worse and worse. But one of the things I liked was when they have the like single file line outside in the alleyway where they're giving them the food so they can keep them there for as long as they need. But then they cut
all those
to the
asshole kids who call them murderers.
Oh yeah, that was wild. But then the cops, like, it cuts to the cops and they're actually eating what looks like a very nice dinner at a table in a room, and it just there's little, they don't even put a lot of attention on it, but there's just these little things that they do throughout the film that I feel is commentary, even though it's subtle. And I think that's the best way to do it, because if they started going, you know, way too into just the differences between the cops and the victims, I think it would kind of lose the plot of what the film is actually about. But I like that they still throw a couple examples in there.
Yeah, I mean, this is still just a politically minded filmmaker who is someone who is like, yeah, I want to make the you know, the buffoonishness a little bit and the absurdity of how our country responds to these things. Because even when he expands to the military reports and the news reports and the journalists and the broadcasts on TV, radio, he's definitely saying something about like modern lines of communication and hysteria and all of this stuff, and the fact that everyone is literally denying what's happening right before their eyes, which is that the cowboy in the movie is shooting people in the theater.
That is what's
literally, which is great because it results in that fantastic climax where the blustering commissioner insists that they run the reenactment again, this time knowing for sure that he's going to kill somebody, and he's like, I'm going to sit in the seat and I am going to prove that this is a real human murderer, not, you know, there's some sniper or something. There's no crazy magic or witchery or anything of that happening here. And he's like, I'm going to sit in the seat myself. And they run the film again, and everyone tensely watches it again, the camera dollying along their stressed and staring faces and heightening the tension of it all, of when and where is this murderous gunslinger is gonna strike again, even though they have pretty good evidence as to who it is and where it's gonna come from. And the commissioner, I love, gets sucked into the movie, and the cowboy at this point in the finale literally breaks the fourth wall and is like, what are you doing? Like, what, like, this is just going to happen. He aims the gun not at the cowboy, but at the audience this time entirely, and framing it to look like the commissioner is basically looking up at this giant man. He's looking up at like a kaiju monster or something. And maybe the coolest effect that I don't even know how they did is the gun and the camera angle following him back and forth as he's panicking.
Awesome. Yeah. Because
he gets out of his seat and he's like, so it was never the seat. It's not a cursed seat. It's not some cursed marketing campaign or anything like that. It is like the cowboy is just shooting people and killing people, and it's like, I'm going to kill you. And yeah, that bit where he tries running to one side of the theater and running to the other side of the theater, and the camera is literally dollying back and forth, and the perspective is switching inside the film that they're, you know, low angle shooting up and watching. Yeah, it's an incredible effect.
I love
that I was just pretty blown away by.
Yeah, that's when that is definitely the moment too where I went, okay, this has to be in some way recreated or a film within a film, because that specific technical move was just so impressive. And again, the movie that they're watching too just looks like a very authentic spaghetti western. And so all those effects kind of coming together for this finale was really amazing. There were, before we get too into that, there were two things that I wanted to say just because it was based on previous points we were making. But the one was, I loved the moment where it's showing all the people watching individual screens before they do the final reenactment, and it's going from like protests and news and all that stuff, but then you cut to one other guy and he's just watching Looney Tunes, and I'm like, that's the guy. That dude knows what's up. And the other one was when it starts to do kind of like commentary on how people would even be reacting to the violence of what or the violence that's being done from this film or seemingly during this film. And it cuts to the director of the movie, and he's talking about making a recut because he can capitalize on the new like intrigue of the film, because now it's a cursed movie and everyone's like, who's gonna die while we watch it and all that. So I loved those two little commentaries there.
Yeah,
that was excellent. And something and it was very much giving like sort of Twilight Zone vibes. I think especially like at the end, the sociologist, so after we have that like amazing scene where the cowboy is like pointing the gun and it's focusing in on the commissioner and like, it's just falling around. And then we see the cowboy, he's got that, lit cigarette and he flings it up at us onto the ground and it comes out forward. And the blurring between the spaghetti Western and, the cinema, it's fully like intermeshed, And then the sociologist, he's talking to the investigator and like they pick up the cigarette and then he's kind of like explaining what happens. I definitely like, I feel like that was like sort of giving like a television
wrap up.
They're like, okay, we got to explain some things like in case they didn't know what was happening. Like we got to make it clear, which I get. Well, I kind of would have liked.
And it was so funny because you made this pairing. So my brain was super prepared for the direction this was going to go in. But I guess for a lot of people, it would have been like, oh, that wasn't a murder mystery. The movie was killing people. That maybe does deserve a little bit of more talk about than it just happening, I guess. But it was so funny because of your pairing. Yes. I was like, oh no, that's normal. That's what a normal movie would do. But now I did have to kind of deprogram my brain a little bit to be like a 70s TV movie audience in Italy probably would have just been like, I thought I was watching a murder mystery of a guy who gets shot in a movie theater.
Right. Yeah.
And it does, the fact that like the Twilight Zone aspect of this technically is a twist, I guess,
Yes. Oh, totally. I think also just to wrap up that point, part of me would have, I think, and this is just a personal note, but I understand why they had the sociologist explain some of it, right? Because I think, for the TV audience, they were like, okay, we got to make some things clear. This is an unconventional ending for all things considered. And, excellent movie, but I would have preferred, I think, if the sociologist, like, if they didn't have him go into everything so much. I kind of like, I just loved the, I got it, like, sort of, as he was, like, the cowboy is, like, sort of, killing us and the cinema is real. I kind of got that alone. So I feel like I didn't necessarily need the explanation, but simultaneously I like get the decision why they did that. I'm like, okay, that makes sense.
I do like that line that he gets where he's like, men constantly destroy each other with the machines they create. He's talking about like weapons and cars and many other things they both own and are owned by. And he gets a great line sort of philosophically discussing what happened where he's like, there's no reason why the images humanity feeds itself shouldn't do the same to us. But I totally agree that like, the sequence itself does that, and you didn't need him to keep going on about it for minutes. There's a part where he's like, have you ever heard of Ray Bradbury? Have you heard of science
that
fiction?
part
And I was a little I was like, okay.
I was like, all
okay,
right.
this guy's a student.
And then we get it, buddy. You're a sociology, you read.
And they have the moment too where he like, even picks up the cigar, which I feel like you didn't need the speech. You really just needed like even one of them. You didn't even need both of them.
That's a cool image.
Just watch it.
Like, that's a cool image, him grabbing the cigar.
Yeah, like have the like everyone leaves the theater. They've figured it out in some strange, weird way. And he walks in, he picks up the cigar, like sees that it's been physical and it's in reality, and then you could end it. Like it is strange to just
that would have been excellent.
Because it's still explaining everything. I mean, having the cigar there, I think your normal average movie viewer would be like, oh, okay, he actually shot that guy. But it's a little bit more dialogue than is necessary. But I still do kind of like the just hit, like they're back and forth, and it's just a play on words, and he's like, you think so? Question mark. Credits. Just just I thought it was fun, but I do think it's a little unnecessary for sure.
Yeah, again, it does feel like they are playing off the fact that, 70s TV procedurals at the time would have, you'd have the guy, the detective, speak to everyone and be like, yeah, so it turns out it was this guy in that room with this object,
And I do.
So this is, I think meant to be a little bit of a play on that.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
And because you do, like, for Twilight Zone references, it's like to have the guy that did the ballistics report, he comes in, he's like, it was actually from an 1863 revolver. And just
that's a sick moment.
Yeah, adding on to the supernatural elements I thought was really cool, but doing it pretty subtly, I thought was good. So yeah, I really liked this movie.
The ballistics guy on the other end of the phone being like, yes, I said 1863, 1863.
The murder weapon came from very far away.
And the film reel disappearing before they can do anything with it too.
Yeah.
And it is the amount of that sequence confirms what is supernaturally happening. I think is very, very well
It
done.
is really funny to think like the film itself physically leaves as if it made an escape. It's like, I murdered someone and now I'm off. I'm on the run.
I also like, we end these two films with people dying. The cinema killed them. And
That's
very
right.
cohesive. You don't come across many films where the camera kills them at the end, but these two are aligned in those ways. And what more could we ask for, I feel.
Well done to find the two movies that might do that.
There we go.
Yeah, no, it's great. And but yeah, pivoting towards reductive rating round on Closed Circuit, I think once again Closed Circuit's going to get a solid 4 for me.
Yeah.
I did really think that the merging of single location murder mystery and Italian TV police procedural and just like supernatural full-on meta horror of a spaghetti western coming alive Twilight Zone style and just murking people in the actual theater is really well done. I think that Montaldo just makes fantastic and comical use of these characters, wrestling with the fact that they think that they're, or that they maybe should be in, and the viewing audience thinks that they're in this like dry and literal just 70s procedural of who shot the guy in the theater, and we're gonna figure that out, and we're gonna interrogate each person, Agatha Christie, Sherlock Holmes style, and we're gonna find this lone gunman assassin, and compounded obviously by the fact that every personality they speak to is kind of a little bit eccentric, a little bit fun and suspicious, and has something to hide unrelated to the crime at hand. Like it really does deploy the tropes of the murder mystery whodunit, I think, quite well, as a bit of sleight of hand to give you the bullheaded perspective of these cops who don't have a bigger imagination that the cinephile character who was the first victim might have. If he had survived, he might have actually helped them out and been like, the movies are doing it. His whole essay he wrote about how
the movie knew, they're like, this is the only guy that could figure it out, so we're shooting him first.
Well, he was the guy who they found his critical writing, and he was writing about how movies aren't mirrors anymore. They're like an actual infiltration weapon and like all this kind of stuff. And it was like he fucking knew, man. They should, if they had been able to talk to him. But again, the fact of the way that Montaldo I guess subverts then the 70s procedural by really, really directing the hell out of this and moving the camera in interesting ways, intense ways, and slow ways, and really emphasizing the artificiality of the things that, of what's being constructed here and the claustrophobic setting of the movie theater, and really having you clue in and pay attention to the, in a thriller way, the kind of reality bending and infiltrating power of this relationship that you have with this big thing that you're watching on the screen, and all building to that fantastic supernatural climax that I don't even entirely know how they did. But it's really, really fantastic watching that cowboy just be like, yeah, see this stupid cop in the theater? I'm going to shoot this guy down no matter what seat he's in. It doesn't matter. And it's a really, really well done sequence. And it does get at some cool philosophical ideas on the power of movies and the power of making of them infiltrating and becoming real to us. And, again, I do think that the sociology psychologist character is both humorous and also given a pretty cool point at the very end of it of, the images we feed ourselves coming back to haunt us and doing the same things that we do using, weapons and cars and machinery. It's the technological side of it and the artistic side of it kind of going hand in hand there. And yeah, so I had a really good time with this. And once again, always feel represented by a character who is specifically cited as watching 2 or 3 films a day and even rewatching films and studying biographical details of filmmakers. I was like, unfortunately, I hope this is not how it ends for me, but this guy would have loved Letterboxd. So RIP to a real one, I think.
Yeah, this is the scariest film for cinephiles. Absolutely. It's out to get you. The very thing that you love. I think this is great. I'm also gonna for it. I do, at the end, I do think that there is kind of that overly explained clean wrap up, but there's so much surrounding that I really don't think it matters. And even within that, they still find ways to make the images really interesting. Like you were saying, Josh, I love the climax where the camera is following as the character on the screen is following its victim. Like, I think that's an amazing shot. The way that the camera flows through the theater, especially in the beginning, just establishing the space and all the characters, the blocking is incredible. It's repeated on purposely so that when they do the reenactments, there's that feeling that you're doing something again, but you can kind of see, especially in the performances, how everyone is like much more tense and almost expecting something awful to happen. There's just so much good suspense buildup with that, while also being kind of lighthearted, strangely enough, like all the eccentric characters. There's a lot of really funny moments. Again, I really thought that music cue that they do with the sociologist as he's about to explain what they think is a batshit theory, only for the inspector to kind of just undermine him, stop that moment, and continue on with his more conventional interrogations. It was really funny, and there's a lot of that like sprinkled throughout the film. Yeah, no, I think this is solid. I would definitely check it out, and it's on Tubi, like we were saying at the beginning, so it's available to everybody, U.S. and Canada, I believe. I want to check out more Montaldo, because clearly he has a amazing skill behind the camera, and I gotta check out something that's called Machine Gun McCain. I mean, that's right up my alley, I'm sure. And to do a Nick Cage movie is really interesting. It's not the most highly rated, but I am a Cage fan, and I'd be interested to see what this director does with him. So, yeah, check it out.
Yeah, I'm interested too. I would give this also a 4 out of 5. I thought it was excellent. And again, like kind of like you said, Jamie, the end, it's a little bit over-explained. Would have preferred a little bit less, but still, I think excellent regardless of that. Like, it has a lot to like bite into, I think, and there's a beautiful mix of like tension, humor, and I think I don't know, I just had a really fun time watching it. I love just like the use of a spaghetti western too is awesome. I love the movie that they like picked to show in this. It was just baller movie. I just loved the cowboy looking at us and different shots of like around that. That was just so excellent. Incredible ending. And definitely check it out. Tubi. They got it all.
They do,
and it's free. It's wonderful. Yep.
And the ads aren't even that bad. If you haven't heard of Tubi, like, it's a sell. It honestly is. It's one of the best. It has so many. The thing is sometimes I can't even download some of these movies, and Tubi will 9 times out of 10 have it if it's more of like an underground thing. Like, this has, I think, 1.5K like entries on Letterboxd, so very underseen. Like, almost nobody, it seems, has really even heard of the movie, but here it is. And yeah, so check it out. You gotta.
Shout out Tubi.
It's available to you right now over on Tubi. This is going to become the Tubi podcast.
It is.
We're just gonna. They should give us a deal.
They should sponsor you.
We already promote you guys. Let's get a sponsorship going. Let's do something. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up, I think, for Closed Circuit there. And for this week's episode, that was once again ARREBATO from 1979 and Closed Circuit from 1978. Thanks so much, Morgan, for joining us and for bringing these films with you. I definitely, neither of us had seen either of these.
Yeah.
So you showed us two films we had never seen and we loved both of them. So thanks so much. Is there anything before you go? We usually have people plug stuff here. Where can people find you or find your art?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. My Instagram handle is going to be mpatten_. And then I'm also on Twitter. Twitter is more my rambling. I do post paintings, but I have more of a just stream of thoughts, whatever, on there. So if you're interested in more of that thing as well, space_boy, but with a 0 instead of a O, and then underscore. So I'm found on both of those, but painting definitely is going to be, you're going to find more of like sort of an archive of my paintings. So, always a pleasure. I'm glad that neither of you had seen these two. That's awesome. And I think my message to people is like, if you're a cinephile, be careful, if you go to the theater, watch out. If you watch 2 to 3 movies a day,
next time we cover a spaghetti western on the podcast, I'm going to be terrified looking at my computer.
Next year, I'm like, don't you dare look at
you
the
should
camera.
think twice. Yeah.
I'm going to look at Lee Van Cleef in a whole new light. So thank you for that. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for this week's episode. We're going to be back in 1 week's time where we're going to be over on the Patreon feed doing the exclusive episode for the patrons over there, where, as Jamie alluded to, we're going greasers mode. We're going to be talking about Catherine Bigelow's The Loveless from 1981 with young Willem Dafoe going greaser mode, kind of in that like To Live and Die in LA and Streets of Fire era Willem Dafoe, pre-wrinkles, where he was kind of scarier. And then we're going to be pairing that with Crybaby by John Waters, starring Johnny Depp and also a bunch of John Waters' usual collaborators, which in my mind is people. There's a lot of people out there who love the movie Grease. Crybaby clears like no tomorrow. It is John Waters doing a loving recreation of that kind of thing. The music is fantastic. The colorful and the pastiche work is all incredibly funny. And it just has that uniquely Waters outsider artist humorous sensibility. So that's what we're going to be talking about next week over on the Patreon. And then in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be joined by 2 special guests, actually, who have decided once again that they want to show us 2 films that we have never seen, but they want to go to the more underrated and underseen side of a fairly well-known filmmaker you might have heard of named Robert Altman. We've talked about him a number of times on the show, including things like The Long Goodbye and McCabe and Mrs. Miller, but they want to talk about 2 movies I have not seen, one called The Gingerbread Man, which I literally no idea what this is other than it stars Kenneth Branagh and Robert Downey Jr.
All right.
And we're going to be pairing it with a new cult classic for the Sleazoid show, Dr. T and the Women from the year 2000, starring Richard Gere as a gynecologist who just really loves women. That is all I know about this movie. I have the ratings on it are hilarious because it seems to be Robert Altman's like least acclaimed movie. It has some of the lowest ratings of his entire career, but amongst my friends and mutuals, it is beloved. I am very, very curious to see the Robert Altman vulgaroturist argument that is about to be put forth by Dr. T and the Women. So that's what we're going to be doing on the main feed in 2 weeks' time. But yeah, that being said, that wraps it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy, everybody.
Keep it sleazy.